What do you mean?
You're going to set a precedent, Mike.
We always start on time. What are you talking about? Usually
A
start on
wizard,
time.
a wizard arrives precisely when he means to.
That's right. Exactly. Thank you. This podcast is never late, nor is it early. Welcome to the Lovecraft eZine podcast. Thanks for watching, listening, everyone. I want to warn you that we're going to do our usual introductions, but I want to warn you that we're going to talk about the Left-Right game podcast and the No Sleep Reddit, where it originated, courtesy of our guest, Jack Anderson. Hey, Jack.
Hello. Hey, guys.
And so we'll talk to Jack in just a minute. But I want to make it clear that this is not the usual talking about books and movies and podcasts where we are recommending, say, hey, go watch this. This is going to be filled with spoilers. So if you've not yet listened to the Left Right podcast game or read the No Sleep Reddit or both, then you should probably listen or watch this podcast later. So hopefully you have. And thanks everybody for being here. Thanks especially to all my patrons who keep the lights on, let me do this. So if you want to be a patron, there's a lot of extra crap in it for you. That's a sales job for you, isn't it? Extra podcasts, extra kind of cool stuff. Just Google Lovecraft eZine Patreon. So let's do introductions, and then let's talk to Jack Anderson, creator of the Left Right podcast, who is in London, so he's up quite late for us, and I appreciate it. Thanks, Jack.
No worries.
So I'm Mike Davis, Lovecraft eZine guy, publisher, editor, and yes, Autumn Cthulhu 2 is coming, but then everybody kind of, when I tweeted that, everybody kind of jumped on that and said, when is it? Yeah, I'm like, I just meant it'll happen, like in 2 years or something. So, but it will definitely happen. So, Matt, you want to introduce yourself and talk about the prize?
Hi, I'm Matt Carpenter. Our prize today is a novel. It is called Mask of Silver by Rosemary Jones. It's in the Arkham Horror family of products, so it is based on board game characters and whatnot. But if you want it, send an email to ezineprizes@gmail.com and put silver in the subject heading. And in a few weeks, we will draw a winner randomly. It could be you, but only if you enter.
And Matt usually does wait a few weeks because it usually takes me about a week to get the audio edition out. So,
yeah, pretty typical is 4 weeks.
Yeah. So you've got time. If you're listening to this, we're actually recording this on January the 24th, 2021. So if you're listening to this anytime in the next 3 or 4 weeks, you probably still got a shot of winning the prize. So, Bridget.
Hello, Bridget Brynmark. I'm a composer, artist.
Pete
Rawlick, writer, editor, author of Reanimators, Weird Company, Reanimatrix, The Peasley Papers, maybe something else. I don't remember.
You're wearing glasses. Why are you wearing glasses? Are you getting old?
Because I need to read my notes.
Jesus,
I've taken copious notes.
And Jack, this is the same Pete Rawlick, who I told you about on our video test, who was responsible for this because he told us all about the Left Right game podcast.
Yeah, he's the great writer who's taken notes.
Tooken?
Tooken? Tooken.
Ben, you want to introduce yourself? You're muted.
I was just waiting for you guys to finish bantering.
We never finish bantering.
Yeah, I'm Ben Handelman. I'm just here to make fun of Mike's hair while I wear a hat, so you can't make fun of mine.
That's great. You're taking John Langan's place because he can't make it today. Great. Jack Anderson. Hey, man. All of us here, we read a lot of weird fiction, horror, cosmic horror, Lovecraftian horror. I'm currently reading The Twisted Ones by T. Kingfisher, and so far I cannot recommend it highly enough. And your writing on a message board on the internet is every bit the quality of that. So, it's amazing what the internet can bring us. You decided to do that, write that down. with, I'm guessing, what, no real thought or reward besides just writing it.
Yeah, yeah, essentially, and much less of it planned than I should have done as well, which was a slight issue with the overall thing. It turns out that a lot of those things that get posted there, they have a lot of the parts pre-written before they post them out, which is an incredibly clever strategy for any writer to do. I kind of went into it as well with less of the parts written, so there's a few, you can see about 2 months between a lot of the final pieces as I kind of scrambled to get the.
But they waited, didn't they?
It did, yeah. No, it was. Everyone was incredibly patient with me because usually they have multiple part things on No Sleep, and it's usually a 24-hour maximum wait before you get the next part. So
really,
I had to.
Because that's one of the questions I was going to ask you, Jack. If you had all of this pre-written, or if you like wrote the first one and where you're like, oh man, everybody likes this, and then kept going.
Yeah, I had the first one written, and then I thought that I'd maybe be able to get around to writing the next one in about 2 weeks, perhaps. And then not only did it really, I was really lucky that it firstly kind of people noticed it and it took off. Yeah. But then at the same time, I was emailed or messaged on Reddit by a lot of people who were wondering where the next part was the next day, because there is an expectation that the writers on that subreddit are smart enough to at least plan a little bit ahead in terms of having stuff pre-written to post the next day. So the next post I wrote in about 3 days, which was kind of a very flurried, about 7,000 words of me just kind of staying up till 3 a.m. trying to get it out. And you can actually chart my burnout piece by piece, because every next chapter comes out a larger period of time.
You're like, guys, this is free. You'll get it when you get it.
Yeah, it was interesting, but I think it's very lucky to have. Firstly, it's very lucky to have people impatient to read something that you've done. So it was a nice problem to have.
Exactly.
And also it was good to have people kind of talking about it, etc. There was a lot of people, however, who thought that the gaps between posting and the fact that I was taking a lot of time to post the next pieces was some form of either intentional marketing ploy based on me kind of trying to generate people waiting for it, or some kind of coded thing. But people trying to decrypt like the spaces between everything and see how it tied into the story.
Right.
Which is a real testament to how my disorganization can apparently be confused for something much greater, which was nice.
Yeah, I read a few of those comments, and I'm like, so so you didn't have the entire story planned out ahead of time.
I had a plan of the beats of what would happen. The actual original origin of it, which I'm happy it didn't really go this way, is there's another subreddit which I wrote on a lot more, which is called Short Scary Stories, which is a short story. It has to be 500 words or less, and I post on that quite a lot. And there were a lot of stories on that subreddit that were list stories, so sort of scary lists, rules of what not to do if you encounter this creature, and the rules are very scary and like imply some strange things about the creature. And the original idea of the Left Right game was that it was going to be a story, a 500-word piece about this mysterious road, and then just line by line, by turn something you'll encounter this, by turn something you'll encounter this. And just progressively getting weirder and stranger as the number of turns kind of you travel along the road increases. So it was originally going to be that 500-word post. I kind of felt there was more to it, but it did mean that when I decided to expand it and write something longer, I had this nice 500-word synopsis of the general beats of what I thought would happen in the story. Right. And then a lot of it evolved as I was writing as well. But it was quite lucky that it started as an outline.
Now, I want to let Pete ask some questions in a minute, but before I do, and of course everyone else. But Pete, it's the one who introduced us to this, and I'm glad you did, Pete. This is the Lovecraft eZine podcast, and it's which Lovecraftian fiction. It's sort of sometimes a shorthand for cosmic horror, which is a branch off the tree of weird fiction, you might say. So everyone here is interested in cosmic horrors and interested in weird fiction, and of course, if you're in general horror itself. But I have to say, this story did not start out this way, but as it progressed, it became, the very essence of what I love about cosmic horror. So many people, and that's fine, everybody's different, are into Lovecraft's monsters, Cthulhu versus Yog Saga, all this kind of stuff. The cosmic horror, the unknowableness, your story did something that I love in fiction, which is basically, like the story I'm reading now. As I progress into it, the Twisted Ones, T. Kingfisher, there's a world beyond the world, and it's mysterious, and it's terrifying, and it's horrible, and it's unknowable, and you can't help but want to know more. So I just thought I listened to the Left Right Game podcast months ago. It's a little fuzzy in my brain. Pete's listened to it 3 times, he said. What I did do also is I thought, this weekend I never read the original No Sleep Reddit. So that's freshest in my brain. But of course the stories are the same, just told a different way. But I have to say that I love it, and that it really captures exactly everything I look for. I think in weird fiction and cosmic horror, that there's more of the world than that there is. So let me just ask you a couple more questions, and I have Pete ask some. How did this start? I assume you work a regular job for a living, or
Yeah.
Okay, and then I don't know if you want to say or not. It's up to you. But some sort of 9 to 5, right? So you just decided, hey, I want to write this story. I'm interested in horror and weird fiction or whatever.
Yeah, I think to be honest, how I kind of became, I'm really quite dedicated at the moment to horror as a genre. It's something that since kind of getting into the community of it, and the community of No Sleep and being on there, it's become kind of the chief thing I would want to dedicate myself towards, which the reason I got into horror in the beginning kind of sounds a bit kind of blasé and a little boring, which was basically I for ages I wanted to get into kind of comedy writing for a lot of my time throughout uni, and and there's a lot of kind of opportunities to write comedy for radio in England. One of the ways as a writer to get into writing on a greater scale in the UK is to maybe get something quite comedic on the BBC, if at all possible.
Sure.
So I kind of wrote towards that, and then I started wanting to put more writing on Reddit, and I've been writing since I can remember. It's always been kind of my chief passion. And on Reddit, I kind of looked at some of writing subreddits, and the horror subreddits were just the ones that had the biggest communities and the discussion. So I just started writing short, scary stories, essentially on the short, scary stories subreddit. And I just, after a certain amount of time, I wasn't writing any other genres, essentially. So it kind of, unfortunately, has the slightly banal feeling, but I kind of just I started on horror because there was just a lot of it. Horror seems to be a real genre for the internet. It's the genre I think the internet thrives on most.
And there is I say no thought or reward. I said no thought or reward at the beginning, and of course you're doing it for the joy of it. That's one of the things I admire. Pete often says, "Don't tell anybody, but I'd write for free." But of course, takes the royalties anyway, as he should.
I would write for books. I would write for books.
Yeah, you write books, but
I
the immediate response of writing on No Sleep or some such place, the immediate fan response or reader response is, of course, gratifying and different from books.
Yeah.
So
that's true. Yeah, and it is a bit of an addicting thing. I think that's another cheap of it. But it's addicting to kind of getting the comments to the point that a lot of aspects of the No Sleep article as well. I kind of had a mentality for the No Sleep article and that sort of thing of giving the readers only about 95% of the story, because I feel that a big aspect of the internet is that the final 5% of the story is developed in the comments by the people who picked up on things, and the discussive element and the interactive element of it was.
Yeah, so on that note, the trailer for King Kong versus Godzilla dropped today. There's already like 30 interpretive videos.
I've got some thoughts on it.
Yeah. It's sort of like, wait.
Langan, why aren't you here?
Yeah, I think I know. I think I saw Mechagodzilla was pointed out in the background. Yeah. I think I have an idea of where he's coming from. Yeah, I agree. But the internet discussive aspect of it is really good, to the point that you do write the story, and there's so much more implication in the kind of internet stories, because part of it is everyone discussing about what's implied and what's been left unsaid. So it's almost like you have co-authors in the comments.
That's a very good point, because in books, of course, you do have that, but it's not tied right to the story. Like we were discussing Disappearance of Devil's Rock on our last podcast. Our friend Paul Tremblay wrote that book, and he's, like I said, there's a lot of ambiguity in his horror fiction, and it's the better for it. When you give all the answers, suddenly it seems disappointing.
But writing for the internet is like you have it is like writing a book, but then at the end of every chapter you have an optional book group meeting that, if you want to attend to learn what was actually going on, the people who are really paying attention will then tell you exactly what you missed, but you don't have to, so you can keep the ambiguity.
Like in the first one, when they were discussing Blue Jay's name, the code name.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
I never thought about it that way. I'm so glad you pointed that out. Now, how involved were you with the podcast? How did this happen?
So I was pretty involved. I mean, I did the writing for all the scripts. So I was the sole writer. I obviously got a lot of very helpful notes, because it was writing for audio was a very new thing for me, and I think one of the more challenging modes of writing, because there's when you have literature, you can put everything that needs to be put on the page. For film, you can show everything that needs to be shown, and then for audio, there's this vague sense of implication that you want to show through audio cues that things are in the scene without having the hammy dialogue of "let's walk over to this table and sit down" sort of thing. So it also, I got a lot of notes to kind of guide me through the process of it, because there is a sense of, again, kind of a sense of implication of that you don't want to talk down to the audience by assuming they can't put the audio clues of it together.
Right.
But at the same time, you want to make sure that there's a sense of what's going on. So I did the writing. I think that was kind of my main part on it, but I was very involved in kind of developing the story and that sort of thing. So yeah, it was a very inclusive process. And then I went out to LA for the first time in my life, just for 2 weeks, to like attend and help out with the recording as well, which was great.
I mean, okay, 2 questions, and then Pete, please ask some. And the first question is, how did this jump from, okay, it's a No Sleep, it's a great No Sleep Reddit story, now suddenly somebody's contacting you because they possibly want to do a podcast, or what happened?
So the answer to that was essentially oh god, it's a bit hard to remember now. It wasn't even that long ago. I posted it, and then there was quite a few people emailing me about different aspects of it, and then my current manager at the time just messaged me requesting a meeting, essentially, and I was talking to a few people about potential representation, etc. And it was really nice to have a meeting, and it was a real sense that my manager got the story behind it and what it was about, and also helped kind of focus the themes, and got that sense of, like you were saying, that sense of kind of cosmic horror, but also cosmic adventure as well, to the story. So and then they went out and they looked at the opportunities for me. I think it's something I need to certainly, as I continue writing, get better at, is I don't seek those things out maybe as well as I should, and so she was really, really instrumental in setting it all up.
I would say you did fine.
It kind of went from there.
I would say you did just fine, Jack. I mean, Tessa Thompson's the star, so how did she get involved is my last question for you.
So that's it. So I will say that in terms of casting, I was just I wasn't as involved in the casting, so it was just a situation of me just getting good news on a fairly monthly basis, and so we got a really amazing cast that was just handled by the guys in LA. And then Tessa Thompson, I think, just read the No Sleep post, had the No Sleep post sent to her, and was just interested in the project, and so signed on. I think she really championed the project to a really large degree, which was really nice. So yeah, it was that was probably, if you could imagine just being asked to make it into a podcast being a big enough thing, when she was sort of name dropped in the meetings we were having about being attached to it, that was the first time I realized that we were making something that was, had a certain gravitas behind it, which was a very interesting, a lot of emotions moment. But yeah, it was kind of entirely out of my hands to do personally, which is frankly a blessing, because I it was really good
for those who don't recognize the name. She's a lady who kicked Thor's ass quite a few times in Thor Ragnarok, and becomes king at the end of Endgame. So yeah, she's pretty well known, and I didn't figure you were like calling up. Tessa, you want to do this? No, okay. You want to? So I'm sure it was some great news for you, and it's well deserved. You're a very, very, very good writer, man.
Oh, so, thank you.
Pete,
what?
Interrogate this young man.
Okay, so to start, I want all of this is not my fault.
Yes, it is. For God's sake, everything is your fault.
So I'm not. Mike is a huge podcast guy and old time radio stuff.
Yeah,
I'm not, and. My friend and I were on a road trip to Orlando to see my son, which is about a 2-hour drive both ways. And he said, "Do you want to hear something really, really good?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure, whatever."
You idiot. You don't listen to the Left Right Game podcast in the car?
Well, I almost smashed the car in the first 5 minutes of the movie.
Oh, yeah, that's a bad 5 minutes to be driving in. Yeah, I see that.
Doing 80 miles per hour down the highway, and all of a sudden, I think I'm in a car accident. So yeah, you do not listen to the Left-Right Game while driving.
Well, the audio on that podcast is just unreal.
So we listened to the first 2 episodes in the car, and then I was hooked. And so it's Sal's fault. And now I've written to like 3 more Q Code podcasts. So yeah, I'm hooked. And so it's Sal's fault. Second, before I even ask you any questions, you started off writing humor, and you ended up with horror. I think there are some very surreal, almost Dali-esque scenes in this that could have gone either into horror or straight Monty Python,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
surrealness. The town that they first drive through,
Jubilation.
Jubilation,
Yeah.
with everybody sitting in their front yards eating dinner. That can go either way. I mean,
Yeah.
that could
You
be
know what I
straight out
immediately
Douglas
thought of,
Adams.
Pete?
What's that?
You know what I immediately thought of was the
No.
town in A Wrinkle in Time.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's there's something surreal about it, and yeah, it's horrible because of what happens on the side streets and what happens next. But in itself, it's just kind of weird, and it could just go any other direction.
Yeah. I think there's an intrinsic similarity between horror and comedy, which is of course why there's so many horror comedies that get produced. Right. But
Yeah.
I think I always say that essentially one thing I've noticed is that there's only really two genres that you can do in 2 lines. There's a subreddit called 2-sentence horror, which is horror in 2 sentences. But there's of course also a subreddit of one-liners, which is just the comedy genre, but in 2 sentences as well. And I think that they both revolve around the same thing to an extent, which is subversion of expectation.
Right.
But comedy is all about everything's very chaotic, and now with the punchline, everything suddenly makes sense to an extent. And
Yes.
then horror is all about everything suddenly makes sense, and then the punchline is actually, the safe place you thought you were in isn't as safe anymore. If that makes sense.
Right. Yes.
That's pretty brilliant. I've never thought about it that way at all. That's great.
I always think it's like a caveman thing of being worried that there's a saber-toothed tiger and then like a small cat actually walks out of the bushes into your cave. You would laugh at that. But if you thought a small cat was about to walk into your cave and then you saw a saber-toothed tiger, you would be terrified. And that just having expectations and having them subverted. If you feel safer after it, you laugh, and if you feel less safe after it, you get a fear response. And comedy and horror are the only 2 genres which are just basically named after the emotion they're meant to elicit. Sci-fi doesn't have a description, isn't a description of what it wants you to feel, but comedy and horror are very just based on the simple thing that you want to get at the end of the process.
Visceral emotion.
Yeah.
I feel like we could talk to Jack for hours about this stuff. I want to point out before Pete continues that it's really great that Tessa Thompson did this, and that your manager did all this and everything, and it wouldn't have happened without him. We know that. Agreed. And a big name like Tessa Thompson making this happen. But as I said to you in the video test, it all comes back to the mind who created this and started it. So, sometimes that gets lost, in movies and so forth. But everything comes from the writer. So,
yeah, it's a long process with a lot of collaboration, but it was a really fun thing to work on. And Jubilation, I completely agree. If they'd stayed there and you knew they were safe, it would have been a fairly kind of hilarious sort of pastiche on what American small towns almost seem like, maybe to a British person. I went to an extent it's based on. I went to that Disney town of Celebration when I was very young, and there was there's a very interesting, and maybe it's a very British reaction to American small towns, but I'm sure it's other people have the same reaction of it being so nice and pleasant and hospitable that, at least from a British mind, you have to assume they're planning something. You have to assume something's going on in the background.
Makes me think of The Vast of Night, that town, set in 1958. Have you seen that film, Jack?
I have not. I gotta say, I'm horribly not well read or well
Well, when you
did
get a chance, please don't read about it or watch the trailer. But it's on Amazon Prime. Is that right, guys?
Yeah.
In whatever version you have that in London, and it's called The Vast of Night. And it's
Okay,
it's
amazing.
this small town, 1958. Everything you're talking about. But anyway, go on, Pete. I'm sorry.
No, but I'm going to build on that, Jack, because about 20 years ago in my city, they built an open air marketplace, and it's supposed to be modeled after this and that. And whenever I went there, I felt this whole sense of unease. And I finally realized that the palm trees, I live in Florida, so not a couple hours from Celebration. The palm trees, they had sanded down the fronds so that they weren't sharp anymore.
Interesting.
It is not an organic place. It is a designer's idea of what a marketplace should be. And that creates problems internally.
It's a strange thing, but I saw similarly, which when I went to, and this is just a smaller side, when I went to LA for the first time, the strange thing is that there are a lot of churches that are built in the sort of English castle-esque looking kind of church style, but all the bricks are incredibly new relative to when you see a church, a church similar in England. It's been covered in moss and soot for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, since the 1700s or earlier. So to see buildings which are built like the old buildings from back home, but they've been constructed from new brick, was very. It looked very strange to kind of see things built in the old English style, but so new as well.
It reminds me of the Steve Martin movie L.A. Story, like early '90s, where he's in L.A. and he's kind of taking this woman from London, I think, around, and he goes, "Yeah, look at this neighborhood. Some of these homes are over 20 years old."
Yeah. That was a big thing that was interesting about going to LA was kind of the newness of a lot of things which were built to look. There was a lot of pillars as well. There was a lot of things supported by Grecian pillars. And in London, all the Grecian pillars were built in the Victorian era or earlier. So it had a bit of a film set vibe to it, strangely enough, to an extent.
So I just want to speak up here because I'm actually in LA I'm in the city limits right now. It's so funny you point that out because the cathedral here is actually really modern, right? They built it in the 90s, and it's like this weird mishmash style. And all the Catholics here hate it because it doesn't look like a classic cathedral.
Interesting, yeah.
So they don't care if you're building it tomorrow. They want it to look like a cathedral from the 1300s or earlier.
Yeah.
And
I can see that. Yeah.
So if you ever come back to LA, the cathedral in downtown, it looks like someone who was 70 years old and is an architect was told to make something modern. It looks atrocious. I would rather it looked like a fake ancient cathedral than sort of like the weird 90s attempt at like, oh look, we love everyone, here's our peace and love version of a cathedral. So it's just funny you mentioned that because someone I know was ranting about it the other day. But yeah, LA is this like the condo I'm in this very second is like falling apart. Like this closet door is off the tracks because the ground is shifting and everything feels like it was set up as a set and then left there for 70 years beyond its use.
Plus, it's a freaking desert.
It is. Well, it's cold today. It's 60 degrees Fahrenheit. I don't know what you're talking about.
Oh, poor baby.
Oh,
Jesus.
60. That's real cold.
Okay.
Anyway, go ahead, Pete. Back to the left-right game.
In the left-right game. So, as a writer, I'm fascinated by names and the choosing of names and why they're chosen. And sometimes I'm told you're reading too much into that. And sometimes I'm told, no, you've missed the entire point. And then I come across lines in the left-right game that say, what does the name Chuck Greenswall mean to you? And I'm like, that is the author telling me that the name means something.
Isn't it Greenwood?
Greenwall.
Walt. It was Walt. Yeah.
Okay,
Walt.
sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, do all the names in your work have deeper meaning?
Like Alice.
Alice,
yeah, definitely. Down the rabbit hole.
I do feel like the moment you started this question, I felt myself being marched down a long road towards disappointing you, because a lot of them were pulled to a strong extent.
The proper answer, Jack, is, my God, Pete, you've hit on it. I'm a genius. How did you know?
No, but I think that I don't know. I think I am proud of Chuck Greenwald. If it sounds okay as a British person's idea of what maybe a late night small town America disc jockey's name could be, I'm glad that sounds. And even strangely enough, even the name Alice wasn't initially a homage to Alice in Wonderland. I'm afraid, and a big aspect of it is if you want to ask me about a few places, I've already said to an extent that jubilation was clearly a word which sounded like celebration. So if all of the strange names will probably be based on my own personal history of things, rather than based on kind of some clever, which is strange because I'm always a big fan of a shameless crowbarred anagram that's somehow placed into the story. So that is one thing. Though another aspect of that is it's another aspect of writing for the internet, which is if you try and include any puzzle elements in your story, they'll be figured out within the first. All of those names, if any of them were anagrams or something along those lines, it would have been uncovered immediately by the strange hive mind that goes to work on those sorts of things. So celebration, I can say that celebration was based on jubilation. Wintry Bay was based on Whitley Bay, which is an English place, which was kind of a strange kind of childhood memory I have, which to kind of go into a little bit was I was on holiday when I was quite young with my dad, and we went to Spain, and there was a older couple there at the poolside, and the wife, who I didn't realize at the time, but it's one of those memories when you experienced it as a child and then years later you look back on it with the understanding of what was really happening. The wife was kind of clearly going through some kind of maybe early stages of dementia or something, which is kind of where a little bit of the Wintry Bay comes from, is this kind of strange memory. But it was a really interesting one, but every so often she would say that it was really good to be back in Whitley Bay, which is a place in England, and her kind of very gruff northern husband, which is a very kind of considered no nonsense kind of part of England, would just very casually like tell her that she's in Spain, and she'd respond with kind of quite elation, but she kind of was like, she used to say like, do you hear that, we're in Spain, to like, and so that kind of thing just stuck in my head as a memory of me hearing it as a child and thinking, what a strange conversation we had with those people, and then thinking back years later and kind of realizing, oh, there was much more to what was happening. It's to an extent a bit of a dark story, but it was everyone involved was
which just seems like where Bonnie and Clyde comes from a little bit, where her supposed dementia and the Wintry Bay and so forth.
Yeah, and I think, and I hate it, and I don't want to kind of like, I never want to explicitly put very unsubtle themes or anything into the story, but at the same time, I think it's just drawing from experiences, but I don't even think were negative experiences, but just experiences where you go through them as a child one way, and then you suddenly look back on your childhood and you see a lot more complexity and strangeness to it, and so that was kind of one of the aspects of where Wunju came from, and that's why a lot of these names, unfortunately, there's no kind of coded stuff that ties into the world at large. If there's any coded stuff, it ties into the stuff that has happened to me kind of in the past that I was drawing on, if that makes sense.
No, it does. It does. It does.
Pete, you did mention
real
quick. You did mention Chuck, the DJ, and that for me was the first, because there's this regular small town, picturesque DJ, and then all of a sudden this what the fuck moment where these screams are coming out of the radio and everything, was insane.
All right, so none of the names mean anything, so that's an entire page.
Okay,
Just,
good.
Sorry.
Well, okay, not
Poor
even
Dad.
the call signs?
Let me think through them. No, none. I'm afraid. Ferryman had a meaning, but it was almost a kind of a fairly obvious meaning of kind of the Stygian ferryman. But I think that was almost kind of something that I wanted the audience to almost think was quite a kind of well telegraphed to an extent, but almost Rob could have called himself that for the very reason of just that being his his meaning behind the phrase, perhaps.
Right.
So I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay. I mean, okay. So Bristol.
Yes.
The name literally means bridge.
Does it?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I've got to be honest. I've never been to Bristol, but that is interesting to know.
All right, next line of questioning, Pete.
She literally builds a bridge. She's the bridge between Rob's past and his future.
I thought that was so insanely.
She's
now that I think about it, yes, I did. That one definitely was very premeditated, along with any other things you hear.
That suicide forest thing with the weird looking being, I forget how you describe it, minus part of an arm that Rob experienced, and then turning out to be Alice herself.
Well, there's your big spoiler.
Well, yeah, I mean, we warned you, but I mean, that's geez, those two guys that did the Endless should film this thing,
Yeah. All right, so let's go on to foreshadowing then.
Okay. Maybe I did some of this, hopefully.
Oh, maybe you did some of this. Okay, so first of all, I love the idea that the woman on the corner, before we even get to the tunnel, I mean, that is Rob's note that he's done everything right. That he's completed all the steps of the left-right game properly.
Yeah.
And it's still not too late. You're not in. But it's sort of the game starts here.
Yeah.
And if you want to quit, you can. But then she hits the car and she's screaming and she says, you're going to break her into, she's going to shatter into a million pieces, something along that line. And, it's sort of a throwaway line, but then 10 episodes in, it's hugely important. And it's a really great piece of foreshadowing. And then to combine it with the hitchhiker and let the hitchhiker, I just love the idea of the hitchhiker because once again, it could be a very comic moment with this hitchhiker in the back seat that incessantly talking about nothing and no one ever responding.
That was so, that guy was so creepy.
and then all of a sudden it turns creepy because he changes tone.
Yeah,
he was played very well in the podcast. I think that everyone was very hung up on making sure the hitchhiker, whoever they picked from the hitchhiker, could do what they had to do. It feels like quite an acting challenge. But yeah, they did really well. It was great to hear the hitchhiker so kind of well portrayed.
Well, and then suddenly he's saying things to Alice and Rob, but mainly Alice, like, I can tell you things, everything that you want to know, and this sudden shift. And then, Ace not picking him up, and then suddenly the hitchhiker's back in his back seat anyway. It's just, yeah, the actor was great, but the writing had to be there. So.
Yeah, you're right, Mike. The scene with the hitchhiker with Alice and Rob is disturbing. The implication that we learn from Ace is puts it over into the next level. Hit me, Bridget. Go ahead. I know you want to say something.
That I want to say something about what?
Oh, I thought you raised your hand.
No.
No? Okay, never mind. But yes, the whole hitchhiking scene, and knowing that they went through this multiple times and played out different variations of it is kind of fascinating. And you could have done that scene over and over again. And it would never have lost any of its impact because the threats would all be different. Now, you have to do it as a writer. That's hard to do.
Yeah, it is quite hard to write a name conversation for that long. It was interesting coming up with. There's a certain point of how many conversation starters you can put into a single person's mouth over like a 10-minute span. And I really wanted on the podcast. I really wanted to do it in real time. I really didn't want to have a time skip to later, if that makes sense. So it had to be, and it had to feel substantial as well. It had to feel like he was in there for at least enough time for you to cover a few streets, if that makes sense. So yeah, it's interesting to write, and I agree. Yeah, everyone on the road would have got vastly different conversation starters. And I always picture the hitchhiker as a bit of a. I think I even described him maybe in some explanatory notes as sort of a young Willy Loman from Death of a Salesman, before the dream of being able to travel America with like a smile and a handshake and good cheer went wrong for him and led to the death of a salesman. But back when he was in his prime, it's always how I picture the hitchhiker as the inexhaustible raconteur. Yeah, I'd love to write more of those scenes.
And it's a nice.
Go ahead, Peter.
Prelude scene to Jubilation. It if he is characteristic of what people are like in this place, then Jubilation is a nightmare.
Yeah, I mean, there's such, and this is a thing which doesn't happen as much in Lovecraftian fiction. It came from I do think that a big thing that I tried to do for this story is I very much followed Lovecraftian fiction. I really like the cosmic horror and the insignificance of the protagonists, etc. that comes from Lovecraftian fiction. I think one thing I tried to move away from Lovecraftian fiction is the idea that the ugliness of Lovecraftian fiction, and it's absolutely fine. But there's and I completely love it. I'm not saying that that's a bad aspect of it at all. But everything that is otherworldly in Lovecraft, to an extent, is horrific and ugly. And I think blasphemous is a term that he throws around. It's all kind of black ooze and darkness and etc. And I think one thing I wanted to put in there was, a sense that it's kind of like when you stand in front of the ocean, you feel incredibly insignificant, but you don't. It doesn't have to be ugly for you to feel powerless and insignificant. It can actually, I went to the Sahara Desert once, and it looks daunting and terrifying, and it is actually inhospitable and will kill you, but that doesn't mean it has to look
Right.
terrifying. And the Hitchhiker and Jubilation are kind of a testament to that, of it, finding, and of course a lot of other people have done this as well, finding something that looks very pristine and proper, and just exploring, I think, one of the chief human fears, especially maybe nowadays, when there's a lot of potential for artifice. I'm not kind of cynical about the internet, etc., but there's the potential for artifice, and there's a general idea that nice doesn't necessarily mean good is kind of a scary social thing for people, that you see something, and that's not super Lovecraftian as much. Lovecraft is very oppressive in a lot of its things, whereas I kind of am driven more to the things which seem really nice until you realize that they're not good.
I got to jump in here, Pete. I apologize, because what he's saying, what you're saying about Jubilation makes me think of, I don't know if you've ever seen it, Angel, the spinoff to Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Have you watched that show?
I saw bits of it.
Well, in the 5th season, as you, Pete, and maybe other guys remember, there's this hell dimension / holding dimension, and it basically looks like the suburbs, and everybody comes out at the same time and grabs their paper and goes in, and and there's this guy being held there, and he doesn't remember who he is, but he's being held there, and Gunn is later forced to spend a couple of weeks there, and he says to Angel later, the worst thing about this place, he said, it wasn't the basement where you got your heart cut out of you every day and then you forgot and your heart grew back. You got tortured once a day and then forgot about it. It was upstairs with the cookies and the homework, but sensing that there was something very sinister underneath. So.
Right.
Yeah, I think when people encounter, it's like I always feel like when you give someone, and it's not a very original thought, but when you give someone in a horror movie or a horror show a gun, the movie immediately becomes a thriller, because you're giving them kind of the power to defeat something. I think that once you give if you're in a horror movie, if the protagonist gets hold of a gun and you find out that the monster can be killed by bullets, it suddenly, it becomes more of a thriller, because there's less of an obvious power, dynamic where it's always one person is completely powerless against forces of evil.
Right.
And I think that there's kind of an aspect of that, which is that I think once you put people in a situation where they're in a hellscape or something along those lines, you can't really do much more in terms of horror. Once you put them in that place, it becomes almost an action movie, etc. If you send them to hell, it's usually going to be some kind of battling their way out sort of situation. But if you just put someone in a safe situation and then slowly turn the safety down or dial the sinisterness up, I think that's horror, and it has a less sense of direction in terms of solutions to it. I think there's, when you put someone in the worst case scenario, when they go down to that basement and they're suddenly in hell, it feels like almost the end of. I kind of feel that feels like the end of the story. Whereas if you put someone in that kind of putting the frog in the cold water and slowly kind of turning the heat up, that's kind of where.
Yeah, that's why Gunn was saying the worst part was upstairs.
Yeah.
And then Alice is your frog.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Traveling further and further down the road is slowly turning up the heat.
Yeah.
And she is we know that as long as there's episodes, we know that Alice is still active. She's safe because she's our conduit. She's our storyteller. Which is
an almost inescapable
right.
Aspect of it of fiction, which some people, and someday I might try to kind of play with to an extent.
Black
there's
Man
always
with
the
the Horn
story
does
that
it very
ended-
well.
There's always those stories that end and then I died.
Yeah.
And it's just like, well, wait, then how are you telling the story and why are you telling the story?
Well, someone who sort of mastered that was George R.R. Martin, getting you caring about people, tossing them aside like old shoes. The characters, even point of view characters.
I
That can be done.
Yeah, I have to point out though that the story Black Man with a Horn by it's T.E.D. Klein, isn't it? Technically, he starts off. The whole thing is first person, but he basically says at the beginning, telling a first person story, there's this sense that whatever horrors I'm about to tell you about, I did escape because I'm alive here to tell the story. But then he says, the fact remains that I have no idea if I'm at the end and if I am going to survive this story. But here's everything I know up to this point.
That's a good start.
Yeah. And then what we finally do find out is that Alice's story goes on. It's Tom who's conveying it mostly to us. And Tom is not happy about it.
Yeah.
Tom has been used. Tom is a tool of Alice. And
I think that's pretty accurate. He's I think like I made a big thing, especially in the No Sleep post, of writing him as if he was actively understanding that he wasn't the protagonist to an extent, and almost that he lived his life with the feeling that he wasn't the protagonist in his own life story, that the protagonist had arrived in his life in the form of Alice, a very driven person who was so driven and smart and successful and had such gravity to her that when she left, there was a general sense that she was taking the most interesting aspects of the story with her. And he was almost like if Samwise Gamgee had chosen not to leave with Frodo for the Lord of the Rings, he would have been left there in the Shire thinking, oh, the story just left and I didn't get on the bus. And now I am. So I think Tom, I always like the idea of writing, not as blatantly as this, but writing a side character who feels, and a big part of their psychology is that they feel very much like a side character who is playing a part in a bigger person's story.
He tries to sort of take control of his own narrative. He tries to have some set of gravitas by investigating Alice, by finding her parents.
Yeah.
And all that does is lead him to the conclusion that he is nothing. But for her voice.
It's sort of like Matt Carpenter is the side character in Isabel Carpenter's life. I mean, Matt, you know what I'm talking about.
Oh, that's completely accurate.
No, but that it must be heartbreaking and really damaging to your psyche to understand that you're not the lead character in your own life.
I think that's a good point, and to another extent, I think there's a happier take on it as well. Though that certainly is one of the kind of official takes. But I think that he plays at. I feel like Tom plays at being the protagonist, tries to be the protagonist, and it's quite nice to be able to write a story where you have one highly competent protagonist and a second far less competent protagonist, and it's nice to have one where the stakes are really high and there's a hyper competent protagonist to face them, and one where the stakes, or at least what needs to be done and the level of danger, etc., is much lower, but you have almost a protagonist who to them it's still a fairly insurmountable task to the danger scales to the competence of the two protagonists. But I think when he gets onto the road, I've always kind of felt like that's him earning a kind of a little bit of status to the extent. So I like to think that he would go back. I like to think that wherever he goes next, he'll go back with the understanding that he's capable of what he, more than he thought, and hopefully that he maybe doesn't need to chase the protagonist down. He could have a smaller, maybe less exciting book that he's prepared to helm himself, if that makes sense.
He's not doing the male thing of where he's trying to rescue the female in his mind, do you think?
I think that I think that's obviously, you know, something that is big in fiction. I think that I've made a major point to make sure that he spoke about Alice, especially in No Sleep Post, spoke about Alice as a friend, and there's never really a point where he doesn't frame what he's doing as the idea that he has a friend who has gone missing and he wants to find out what happened to her. So I think that's always what I try to approach, because I've always liked, I'm a big fan of Studio Ghibli, which I think most people who have watched Studio Ghibli are. I've not heard many Ghibli haters, but there was you know, a lot of the male-female relationships in Studio Ghibli movies are entirely platonic, and nothing comes out of anything in the end. And none of the movies are lesser for it to any extent. And I kind of have always liked the idea of just having a reason of, if someone were to ask, you know, are you just doing this because you fancy her? Are you just doing this, you know, because you feel you need to protect her? I think the idea is that he'd be able to reliably come back to them and say, I have one of my best friends has gone missing and hasn't reported back, and I'm doing what a friend should do.
That's true. You've got, yeah. And he does constantly point out how much better, smarter, more driven than she is. You know, he basically looks up to her.
Yeah.
Not basically, he does look up to her.
Mm.
And I also want to point out, before we run out of too much time for you, and how great it is that you don't answer all the questions. And that there are creatures that you see in this story, and of course here in the podcast, that are never explained. Like I want to read something from the original No Sleep Reddit. Rob turns in my direction before alarmedly staring into the forest, where a pale figure is winding its way towards the pair. From what I can ascertain, as it briefly leaves the obscuring undergrowth, it seems to be small, tremendously thin, and crawling unevenly on its hands and feet. That's just really creepy, and you never really explain what this creature is. I mean, there are things that happen to it, like with flashlights and so forth, but it's immensely strong, and it's, if it is explained, I missed it. But I think not explained is, again, ambiguity is great in cosmic horror and weird fiction. So
I think as long as you don't promise answers, I think that's the only time when that falls down. You have to be very, and I think there's certain times when Rob says in the story, Rob has a very, and it's mentioned, I think the phrasing is that he has a very laissez-faire attitude to the workings of the road, and once he understands that he's in a completely new world with new science and new laws he couldn't possibly hope to comprehend, his answers to a lot of questions when she asks who is this hitchhiker is, you know, he's the hitchhiker. And I did want, from even the No Sleep Post, I did want to get across a sense of, and it makes the world feel bigger if you can't explain everything. And you know, Rob's answer to everything is essentially, all the science textbooks for this place haven't been written yet, and I'm not a scientist, so we're not going to in our lifetimes probably understand half the stuff that happens here, because it's a completely new set of physical universal laws,
which is horrifying and exciting and wonderful at the same time. It can be summed up in the word awe. The word awe can be absolutely horrifying and terrifying and wonderful at the same time. Now, near the end, she meets some sort of cosmic being, Alice does, and obviously you go in a very different direction than Lovecraft would have, let's say, or a lot of cosmic horror writers. And you only describe it as the voice, and it says, I care more than you know. And here's some Lovecraftian horror for you. There are things greater than your understanding, forces that exist beyond the realms of your comprehension that you would consider a threat to everything you hold dear. And then it also, it says, I love this. And again, Jack, I'm not trying to butter you up, but you're such a good writer, man. You are traveling the aberrant strand, a singularly stable flaw in the fabric of reality. As it carries you further from the world you know, you will be freed from the influence of the old laws. I love that first sentence. You're traveling the aberrant strand.
Which is kind of the implication that this creature, which many people discuss, the implication that this creature is a future version of Alice.
I wondered that, yes.
Is implied by the fact that Rob, very early on, refers to what he thinks of a road as a stray thread running off the spool.
Yes.
And that were it to be Alice, after all the transformations she goes through, etc., mental transformations she goes through, she still uses the same metaphor, but she just uses different wording. The stray thread and the aberrant strand being pretty much synonyms of each other, but she's much further along. So she uses bigger language. That's a thing that elder gods and similar beings do.
Right.
They find a thesaurus along the way.
And the voice says, she goes, do I have a choice? And the voice says, you do have a choice, but you've already made it.
Yeah.
Pete or anybody else, anything else for
Matt has a question.
Matt.
Just a couple. Okay,
Yes.
so the first is, we have heard that this has been under discussion for adaptation to a visual medium. Is that true?
Yes, yeah. So that's slowly on its way ahead. So Amazon Prime are wanting to make a TV series of it, which is very, very exciting, and will be a very interesting challenge to make sure I kind of translate it to the.
Will you be at your regular job much longer? Because, next time we ask you for an interview, I might have to go through 5 people.
I hope not.
Okay, so that's still pretty nascent then, like no casting yet, no for sure it's going into production. You could tell us who the cast is.
What can you tell us? Yeah, without getting into trouble.
I have to say that no, there's not too much to say on it. Of course, it's an interesting time for Hollywood and the world in general. As in terms of a climate to be making things, but it's the conversations are happening, and I've already written a large document about what kind of stuff can be expected on the road. So I've already kind of written almost a kind of a mini breakdown of my thoughts and views on it. But it's really exciting to be moving on. But I don't know, and I'm not sure how at liberty I am to share too much about it either.
So
well, I was just gonna say, Jack, do you feel any sense of anxiety that, when something is adapted, like something like this is adapted to a visual medium, if you have the wrong director or whatever, and too much is shown, then that mystery and fear goes away. It has to be done just right, doesn't it?
I mean, I think definitely. I think that's the sort of thing that, to be honest, I am trying to basically say that, I won't need to worry about that for a very long time. Okay. Secondly, the conversations that I've already had on it has been, incredibly positive in terms of, just a level of understanding of what makes it scary and what makes it and how to handle certain elements of it. So I think that everyone I've talked to has been really helpful. But yeah, it's going to be something which, the main thing in my mind is keeping everything that worked about the podcast and the No Sleep Post as well. To an extent, the No Sleep Post was such a big thing for me, but keeping any level of spirit of it alive as long as possible is what I'm going for. Because, to an extent, I think I can't wait for the people who read the No Sleep post to see the show, and I'm weirdly kind of, I mean, it's not that weird, but I'm fairly preoccupied with making sure that when they watch it, it feels like it was made for them. Almost like, a lot of the best MCU Marvel movies feel like they definitely were made for the general public, but if you were a fan and you were watching it, it was made for you. And though, the No Sleep Post had slightly less readership than Marvel Comics, it's kind of the same thing. So I'm really dedicated to making sure that works. But everyone I've talked to has really kind of gelled with that idea as well and gone on board.
It's nice to know that you feel that they're on the same page. Matt, you had more.
Yeah. People here say, this is where I say, well, what have you done for me lately? But okay, this is something that the podcast has been done. It's being adapted. Say, hopefully we'll get to see something in a few years. But what's next for you? I mean, what are you working on now? Are you working on a novel, or what's going on?
Yeah,
I am. Yeah, and again can't talk much about all these things. The main reason that I can't talk about these things is probably because I'm probably allowed to talk about these things, but I just don't want to find out. But I actually wasn't. Which
yeah.
If anyone were to make that mistake, it would almost certainly be me. But I'm writing a novel which is going to be in kind of a horror space, which I've been having a lot of interesting kind of timed writing. It's strange to be. I did a lot of kind of writing for non-immediate audiences, but for some reason, since the Left Right game, No Sleep stuff, it feels almost like, even though I wrote a lot before that, the immediacy of audience response, etc., makes it that when you're writing an entire novel with no chapter by chapter feedback from the general populace, it feels kind of, it feels like as I go along, I'm just like, I really wish I could just submit this to the internet for a bit of for their views. But that's really interesting to work on, and I'm also.
But that's the life of a writer, though, for the most part. Unlike what you experienced.
I was spoiled. Yeah, exactly. I was spoiled by constant dizzying feedback. And then I'm also in the process of writing a few things for TV and film and pitching those around as well, which is again a very interesting thing, because selling my work is and getting into conversations with people and talking about my ideas through that kind of lens is something which is a little new to me to an extent. So
maybe you need an agent, maybe.
Yes, COVID aside, the last few years, we really are in a golden age of television, with Netflix, with Amazon Prime, Hulu, there's suddenly so much more you can do, and they take more chances than they did than say ABC, NBC did in the 10 years ago, let's say. So there's a lot of opportunity out there for things like this.
Yeah, and I hope for that. And I do have, I mean, like I said, I've been writing since for ages and ages in my entire life, and it is to a point that I've bored my family with a lot of ideas over the years, and though 99% of them turned out to be, obviously very bad. I think I now have this kind of backlog of a lot of projects that I'd like to do, and so hopefully I'll be able to get at least some of them kind of somewhere. But yeah, definitely I'd love to do TV.
Who are your influences? Like when you said you've been writing for a long time. Are there any people that they had a great impact on you when you read them that you carried over?
I think that Neil Gaiman is a big one for me. Neil Gaiman. He's someone who I've read a lot of, and also who I love his ability to do other worlds in a way that is fantastical and grounded. Which is very, very exactly very difficult to do. And then I've read some Lovecraft as well, and though I've not read much of it, the vibe of it is very.
If I could pitch a few things your way,
Of course, yeah.
Because it's obviously seems to be the kind of stuff that you like. Laird Barron, friend of ours. Yeah, I'm not mentioning him because he's a friend, but because he's such a great writer of cosmic horror and so forth. And we've mentioned Paul Tremblay, John Langan, who's usually on this show. The Fisherman is a really good example of he wrote a novel called The Fisherman several years back. So those are just a few. So, Bridget, you haven't asked any questions. Do you want to ask Jack some questions?
Everything pretty much got covered already. I just, I wondered what it was like when you said you went to LA and you got to watch them making the podcast. What was that like? Did they have a lot of the audio going on during the filming? Or was it all just dialogue and then they added some of the audio later?
Yeah, it was no audio. So the audio came in much later in the process, and it was just a soundstage with a few. It was very straight. It was very, there were some very strange aspects of it from a writer's perspective who'd never had a proper recording aspect to it. They got Alice and Rob's characters together. It's really bad, but I always just see them as the characters.
Yeah.
And they did the entire Alice and Rob in the car saga in the first day, which weirdly felt very weirdly felt very strange to it's the core of the story, and to have it kind of run through in chronological order in such a short amount of time on the first day was a strange feeling, if it makes sense. It was weird to have that entire saga done before we moved into and then we suddenly moved on into the rest of it.
So let me understand this. You were watching Tessa Thompson and the guy who played Rob record all this.
Yeah, W.L. Brown. Yeah. Yes. And then there was one great time when we had pretty much the entire convoy in, which was an amazing day because it had. There are some scenes that require everyone to be present, and it was very interesting. It was it was an incredibly professional recording, which it was interesting to be part of something with that kind of level of professionalism and everyone kind of working together to get it sorted. I was probably the least professional person there. I did ask a lot of people questions about what particular American things were when I probably should have not been. But it was my first time in America in a very long time.
I'm sure you did fine, and you absolutely had the right to, being the creator and the writer. What was it like to meet the lady who can beat up Thor?
I have to say, yeah, she did really, really amazingly. Firstly, and she was very. Obviously, again, really, really professional. I think professionalism, for some reason, is the thing that I really took out of it. It was really interesting just to see a room full of people working together so well. I was in a position of giving her a few notes, which was really great to kind of be able to talk through Alice's character with Tessa Thompson. That was really, really cool. But she was really great. And any new people who came in, she kind of helped them with the scene and where they were in the story, etc. She definitely kind of made the story, and it's kind of turned into a situation where I feel like after a very short amount of time, she kind of encompassed the definitive Alice sort of vibe as well. Which it was nothing but kind of good things.
Well, she's obviously a huge fan of the story, so it must have felt great to realize that Tessa Thompson read your No Sleep, loved it. What did she say to you when she first met you about it? I mean, anything of that nature?
Yeah, I think she had some questions. I can't quite recall them. She had some questions about Alice, but she I think was just very positive about the story and the journey of it. And Alice, to an extent, I think has a lot to, as a character, has a lot to do and and it displays a lot of different skills, and also has a lot of different emotional states, etc. I think she pretty much goes through every emotion in the book at some point. So yeah, I think she came in. She was really excited about a lot of different aspects of what would be happening. So yeah, it was great. I think she did amazingly.
Pete mentioned that I'm a big fan of old-time radio horror and audio drama in general, and it's just really great. Another thing that the internet has given us is that audio drama is making more and more and more of a comeback. And this is one of the, if not the one of the most professionally produced audio dramas I've ever heard, with the most amazing sound. So yeah, when they say don't listen to it in your car,
I did, but yeah, the first 5 minutes were pretty bad.
I sent Jack. I made this, that meme of what's his name, Boromir. One does not simply walk into Mordor. I sent him. One does not simply listen to the Left Right podcast in your car.
In your car, yeah.
Look,
yeah, it's a little eerie because as you're driving, you're thinking, well, what would happen if I just turned left right here?
All right, so last question, because you're way past your time, and we know you're tired. You got to go to work tomorrow. Could you do for the rules? Could you do this in a big enough building?
In a large enough building. What if you had a road? If you had a road built, and you were in a large aircraft hangar.
So think about an IKEA. Our IKEAs are huge.
You have to be in a car. That's the rule.
Do you?
Yeah. Don't you?
I think you have to be in a car. I think it has to be a road. So if you built the road into the IKEA.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
You can do it.
Yeah.
I don't see why not.
Yeah. I'm just trying to figure out, is the car, was the car essential, or, could you just be wandering the streets and accidentally do this?
It would be very difficult to have to do. I mean, I'm not sure. I wonder how many times people turn left and right.
You mentioned Lord of the Rings a little bit ago, and this all stems from Bilbo Baggins when he says, "It's a dangerous business, Frodo, going out your door. You step into the road. If you don't keep your feet, there's no telling where it will take you." So that, which is exactly what happens. In a car.
I have heard that some people, I have heard kind of vague reports, unconfirmed reports that people have tried the left-right game to some extent, which is interesting. I think some people in LA tried it, and I don't know if LA roads are made for it.
No, I don't think so.
So, well,
our resident LA guy left.
Yes, I was gonna say.
Right.
You had to go.
Well, it was Arizona, wasn't it? Or
Phoenix,
was enough of a grid that they could do it.
Phoenix, Arizona, New York, and Chicago have grid systems. And as I was doing, I know for some reason a little bit about grid systems now because of just weird research. And then having looked at it, the New York and Chicago ones, one being much kind of bigger cities, and also I don't know if all the roads were two-way. So I had a feeling that you wouldn't actually be able to get very far in both cities. But
the traffic, you can't even play the game because you're in
traffic.
New York City and LA for all I know. So Jack, thanks so much for coming on the show and talking with us, man. And I know you're up late, and I appreciate you talking with us.
No, of course. Thanks so much for having me on.
So
really look forward to stuff from you in the future, gotta say.
Yeah, I hope I can have you on in the future. And again, this is a very well written story. I can't stress that enough. And so everything that's coming your way is quite well deserved. So congratulations, man. So
thank you.
Appreciate it.
And we'll on that note, we'll let you get to bed, and I hope to talk to you again in the future. So,
yeah, me too. Cool. Have a great night, guys. Thanks so much.
Hey.
You too.
Jack.
Bye.
Such a humble guy too, for all the.
Yes, and then there were 4.
And then there were 4. Yeah, we've got less people today. So
that was really fun.
Yes.
Yes.
I was you gave me some of the most amusing time I'm having this whole year, Pete.
Why?
with all these names. Well, no, they're just names.
That was great. I love
You don't understand. I spent
It's
hours.
like, no, the names mean nothing.
I
No.
mean, that's the best though. It's so funny when anything that you create, and the people get super into the weeds about it, and then they're like, oh no, this means this, and you're like, no, I really just needed something to put there, and I put it there.
Well, and I should know better because I was at this panel at Miami Book Fair one year, and they had the people that write Cliff Notes and Spark Notes up, and they were talking about Amy Tan's novel, and they were talking about, we're in the kitchen, and the curtains are blue, and that represents her melancholy. And Amy Tan stands up and says, no. The curtains are blue in my mother's kitchen because the curtains are blue in my mother's kitchen.
There's a Peanuts cartoon where Linus draws a figure, and the figure's got his hands in his pockets, and Charlie Brown goes up to Linus and he's trying to psychoanalyze him, and he's saying, you drew the picture of the guy with the hands in the pockets because you're insecure. And Linus says, I put his hands in his pockets because I don't know how to draw hands. So.
Hey, well, mine is from Mad Magazine, or in one of those little cartoons. There's a kid who puts you put a stick in the spokes of your bike so it makes noise when you ride.
Yeah.
And so the adults get into a big argument as to why he did it, whether he was a tank or a jet plane or a race car. They ask him why. He says, to make a racket.
I swear to God, Pete, if you ever bring up IKEA on this show again.
But their meatballs are delicious.
So Jack brought up that thing where, he remembered something that he heard as a child that didn't make any sense to him and then took on a deeper meaning.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And so I can remember as a kid going to my grandparents' house for Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
And about, 5 hours later, after everybody's eaten and all the kids are huddled upstairs and we're listening to the grown-ups and the voices are getting louder and the words are getting angrier. And finally we're like, all right, kids, time to go. And then everyone's driving home and, my dad is like swerving down the road and fuming. And my mom's trying to, pat him on the hand. I'm like, it's like, why do all these family gatherings end with fighting and, driving down the road angrily? And like, as an adult, I look back and I realize that they had a highball in their hand every 20 minutes.
Well, yeah, that'll do it.
And, it's not that they're arguing, they're drunk.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh my God, we were driving home drunk.
All right, so you guys know about this? Because I know Bridget has some Kickstarter questions. But I just heard about, maybe I'm just late to the game here, but Crypt TV, Wikipedia describes it as an American entertainment company focused on developing, producing, and distributing horror-themed digital content with an emphasis on monsters and recurring characters in linked universes.
Yes.
You gotta love this, Pete, and Rick would have to love this too. It specializes in short-form horror videos made for the internet, including viral characters such as the Birch and the Look-See. I have so many books to read, and now I feel like I have so much to watch.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
it
the
looks
Birch,
really well.
I've seen that Birch thing, a million times. It still creeps me out.
I've never seen it, but I just discovered about Crypt TV. All right, real quickly, you have a Pete. You have a Kelly Young bourbon story to tell, and then in like 3 minutes or less.
All right, so we're at HP Lovecraft Film Festival in Portland, Oregon, and we're up on the dais in front of the audience talking about the origins of the King in Yellow and things. And it's me, Kelly Young, Joe Pulver, St. Joshi, maybe a few other people. And Kelly has brought a bottle of scotch, I think, and he's got some glasses, but he doesn't hand me a glass because he's out of glasses. He hands me like a paper cup. and we're talking. It's like I'm drinking scotch out of a paper cup, and
Right.
I'm all the way down at the other end from him, so I can't see what's going on. And so we're 30 minutes into this conversation, this discussion, and I don't know this, but the bottle of scotch is gone.
This was in San Diego, right?
No, Portland.
Port. That's not the one I'm thinking of then. Okay, go on.
And the bottle of scotch gets finished off, but nobody tells me because I'm all the way at the other end. And I pass my cup down to Kelly for a top off, and unbeknownst to me, he whips out a bottle of what had to be White Lightning moonshine.
That son of a bitch.
And then it just gets handed back to me, and I don't even look at it. I just, oh my God. You could have, I was literally knocked on my ass. I'm walking around, I stand up and walk around the dais, because, my throat's on fire, my stomach's burning, there's alcohol rushing to my head. I can't feel my fingers or my toes.
Yeah, you got to go to one of these, you and Mike, Bridget.
Yes, I can't wait.
Things like this happen.
I'm sorry, Bridget.
I'll see what I'm drinking before I consume it.
The reality is a ton less glamorous than they say.
It's
just letting you know.
It's not glamorous. It's crazy. Nobody said it was glamorous.
Time with friends would be nice. I look forward to that.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So, do you have specific questions? What do you want to do? What do you want to say? What you want your Kickstarter to be, or do you want to just talk about general questions?
Oh, sure, both. So yeah, I asked this question in general to my friends on Facebook, and Mike was gracious enough to be like, yeah, I know some stuff. So I, for a little over a year, have been working on a workbook, composition workbook that I'd like to get out into the world. Taught a lot of piano lessons, worked with a lot of musicians and people that want to learn to write music. So I thought, well, there's kind of, once you get past a certain level, the books don't have pictures anymore and they're just really clinical and stuff. So I thought, why does that have to be? So I came up with this idea based on a workshop that I'd done with some of my piano students in the past to do creepy music and how to write creepy music and illustrate it and make it really fun and approachable to, not just the 10 to 12-year-old age group that I initially did the workshop with, but for, teens, adults, and kids at heart. And so, yeah, for a little over a year, I've been working on, writing exercises of how to write creepy music and various scenarios and writing prompts and things like that, and then deciding to illustrate it myself, which is why it's taken over a year.
I think that's
the music stuff comes easily, but the illustration takes longer. But
I think that's an absolutely fantastic idea, and it has the potential to appeal to so many people that are not interested in learning music, but want it because it looks so cool and it's got the illustrations and so on and so forth.
I hope so. And I wanted it to be like kind of one of those adventure games, where there's a story.
Yeah.
And there's just a lot of inspiration in it, I hope, so that even if you don't do the exercises and you don't follow through the whole book, that you at least take some little nugget in there that inspires you to create something.
Pete, what the hell are you doing?
I'm raising my hand.
Oh, okay. You don't have to do that.
Bridget, have you looked at Jeff Vandermeer's Wonder Book?
Wonder Book, no.
It's the illustrated guide to creating imaginative fiction.
Okay.
It's how to write and how to create imaginative fiction, but it's done with diagrams and weird illustrations.
Yeah, I probably wouldn't have looked into that because I don't write fiction like you also.
But what you're talking about, I think, is what he's trying to do in a very similar way.
Yeah, I definitely will check that out. Where I'm kind of coming from is I always loved the old Wizard of the Coast D&D books,
Right.
All right.
So,
Can I say?
Anyway,
I gotta say, one of the things that I've noticed over the years with Kickstarter is the campaigns that are successful have generated a kind of momentum or excitement by a intense social media presence. It's kind of like if you just put it out there and don't then devote any time to it, you may end up with no return, or you're not going to achieve your goal. I have had people say things to the effect that it's almost like a second full-time job to run a successful Kickstarter. And you also have to consider what's your target, because if you set a target that is unapproachably unrealistic,
Right.
people just say, well, we'll never get that anyways, and they don't chime in. Do you know what I mean?
All right.
And I don't know for music, what are the forums that you would use to generate such excitement?
Well, here's the thing, though, and if I can say a few things. First of all, it's horror themed, so that makes it easier. Now, I've consider myself a lifelong student of marketing. I've been studying it for almost 30 years. And okay, so Kickstarter hasn't been around for 30 years, but general principle, things change, but general marketing principles are still general marketing principles. The first thing is, Matt said it should generate excitement. One of the things that generates excitement is it's so cool. All right, you've got that going for you already. To use the Autumn Cthulhu Kickstarter as an example, there are two reasons why people will want to donate to a Kickstarter. More than two, probably, but here are two main ones. One, they want to support you. Or two, they think what you're doing is so cool and they really want the swag and the end product. Or, very likely, a combination of both of those things. Okay, so with Autumn Cthulhu, you have to be very careful with your reward levels. They have to make sense. How do I want to say it? For example, Autumn Cthulhu, one of the reward levels was a really cool coin, which had, if I remember right, Cthulhu on one side and an autumn type forest on the other side. It was really cool. One of the high-end levels was an alternative cover. So there are things that you can offer that won't necessarily cost you too much more work. I didn't make the coins myself. I found a reputable company to do that for me. But one of the things Matt mentioned, unattainable monetary goals. I ask for the minimum necessary to get this done, because there's something very exciting. 30-day Kickstarters, I don't want to use the word standard, but it's kind of what most people do. So if you have a Kickstarter that funds in 3 or 4 days, okay, people are going to look at that and they're going to go, well, why the hell did that happen? This must be really cool. It's just, it's just automatic. So ask for the minimum that will take to get this done. And
I think you also have to be very careful calculating your costs.
Absolutely, you do.
What does it actually cost? And I'm not even talking about your reward for the time, your creative effort, but like, what did it physically cost you to produce this book? Yeah. What does it physically cost to ship this book?
With each level, I had to know, okay, if they get this level, how much profit am I making? In other words, I didn't want to see people giving more and more and more to the Kickstarter and have this growing sense of dread because my profit margin was going down, and therefore I wasn't really making the money I needed to actually get this done. With each, if someone got the coin level, there was a certain amount, there was a dollar amount that I profited, including factoring in, as Matt said, postage.
And the production cost for the coin.
Yeah, production cost for the coin, including everything.
There are horror stories about people who not only made their Kickstarter, but made it so successfully that they became overwhelmed.
Yes.
With just not the pricing, but the physical process of shipping the books.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I made a way that I didn't have to physically ship the books myself. I shipped the coins, but not the books. The books came straight from where they were published. Now, here's something that most people do not, I think of or appreciate. When someone gives to a Kickstarter, when they pledge to a Kickstarter, they're like, oh, I want that coin, or I want that version of Bridget's book, or whatever, or I want that alternative cover, whatever it is. But there's another factor. The people who are sharing this for you, what's their reward? I mean, I get emails all the time saying, hey, can you please share my Kickstarter because it's Lovecraftian? Why should I? Why should I do that? I mean, I do if I think it's really, really cool. But if all I did was share every Kickstarter that somebody sent to me, I'd become a commercial. I've had people that would say, if you'll share this mic, my cat just jumped on the back of my chair.
I saw that.
If you'll share this mic, then we're going to give you, this really high-end, one of the top-level things. Or many Kickstarters, I'm not trying to generate advertising for myself because every Kickstarter is different. Somebody's Kickstarter might not be horror-themed or whatever. But factor in advertising. I mean, it's a 30-day second job or business or whatever it is. And what do you do in businesses if you want them to succeed? You have to advertise. So advertising costs for me need to be built into every other cost, like your postage or the productions of whatever you're doing.
I also thought if you've got not a little idea, but a little project, it's just a book you want to get out, then you got to be careful of not having too many reward tiers either.
Exactly.
Then you get all hung up instead of on the production of the book. It's like, oh, what's my next reward or my next add-on? And a thing that I can't help you with that I wonder about is like, okay, suppose you were doing a Kickstarter here. Certain Facebook groups you can be an echo chamber for. They don't mind if you self-promote, but some others don't allow it. And they'll delete the post. But I don't know what the case is for music. For example, I could think of 10 different groups here on Lovecraftian fiction that would leverage to like allegedly there's like 50,000 people who are members, whether they all look at it or not. And you're probably in a different grouping than me because you also have this intense interest in music. And there may be other fora that are not on a social medium,
right?
That you may be able to post it in. See, this is one of the reason it ends up being a considerable amount of work. You got to think like, where is there going to be buzz?
Right.
That people will share what you have shared.
And what I'm thinking of right now is that there are horror music Facebook pages.
Mm-hmm.
I can think of 3 musicians that you might want to approach as you get further along to talk about getting maybe some reviews or comments from. Jason Wallach, who does a lot of Lovecraftian music.
Yeah, I chat with Jason every once in a while.
Reber Clark.
Oh yeah.
He does professional scores.
Yeah, he's written a lot of the background music for the HPA Lovecraft Historical Society audio dramas. Like the music, he did the music for the Case of Charles Dexter Ward.
Well, and he's very approachable, and he's at almost every Lovecraft festival in there. Yeah, and then it couldn't hurt to approach and ask, but John Carpenter.
You mean my brother?
Yeah.
The thing is,
he's written a lot of stuff of synth music, right?
The thing to do wrong is join a bunch of forums and then immediately post about your Kickstarter.
Oh yeah.
I'm sure you knew that anyway, but I'm more talking to the audience because we wanted to have this conversation, or at least some of this conversation, on the podcast for the benefit. Matt thought it would be a good idea, and I do too. You can't go wrong with. You were talking about illustrations. You know, the thing with social media is there's nothing that grabs attention on a tweet, or a Facebook post or whatnot as an illustration.
Oh, okay. You can stop asking. I'm happy to do all the art. Okay, fine.
So, examples of that, and even illustrations that maybe aren't even going to end up in the final product. I had alternative covers, for example, of Autumn Cthulhu that I paid artists to do just so I wasn't always posting the same image when I did social media. So, and as far as you personally are concerned, I mean, this sounds like a fabulous project. It sounds like you've been really seriously working on it for a long time, and I think you already have a lot of fans from people watching this show, and I'm, all of us will help you to be successful, but I'm speaking in more general terms. I have no doubt that your Kickstarter will be successful. The other thing is with Kickstarters is people whose opinion you value, you can have a draft version of the Kickstarter and you can share that draft version link with people and get their feedback.
Yeah, I wondered about that.
Yeah, you can, and I think it's really an important thing to do. And they can see the Kickstarter. You're like, okay, this is what I think is going to look like, and they're like, this doesn't make any sense, but this looks great. That sort of thing.
Cool.
And not for just a few days before the Kickstarter starts either. I mean, like, a couple of months at least. And it can be very stressful, but also very rewarding. I mean, the first time I was over at Sandy Peterson's house, he was talking about a Kickstarter that he had just miserably failed, that he was trying to do some sort of digital game, if I remember correctly. This is about 8 years ago, something like that. He was going to go take a job, I think, I don't know where it was. It was in India or some such place. Well,
was it overseas, like Germany or someplace?
Huh?
Wasn't it overseas?
It was overseas, yeah. He lives about an hour from me. But the very next Kickstarter he did was sorry, my mind just went blank. What was it, Pete? The $1 million
Cthulhu Wars.
Cthulhu Wars was the very next one he did, which was more in his vein. Digital wasn't really him. Board games were him. The guy's a genius with that sort of thing, and he did Cthulhu Wars, and it was massively successful. And I always remember that, just because a Kickstarter fails, talking to the audience, if you failed at a Kickstarter, the past does not equal the present. Learn from your mistakes. Do a different Kickstarter, or a new Kickstarter, or a better Kickstarter. If a genius guy like Sandy Peterson can fail and then learn from it, fix it, and be massively successful, I mean, so can the rest of us. So,
right now, I know this is something I absolutely don't know much about, but like if you decide to produce this with a print-on-demand service, because then what you're going to want to have is some kind of Etsy store, or even put it on Amazon once the Kickstarter is over, so that this is really just to get you the seed money to do the project. It's not actually the end of your project. Your project can then be sold. If it's POD, like for example, on, I don't know, a music store, is there a music place on Amazon where you can actually generate customers? Whatever
the way to do it, Matt, that's an excellent point. This is just to get you started, and the people who have paid for it, quote unquote, pledging to the Kickstarter and getting whatever extra swag that comes with it, now you got it out in the world and you're selling it. Again, to use the Autumn Cthulhu Kickstarter, it's on Amazon. It's been 5 years since I did it. It's on Amazon. People are still buying the book. So
I wondered about that. So, because I'm sure there's other folks out there that are thinking about, how many should you offer for your initial, and then if it's, just reprints, do you worry about if it's a first edition only for the Kickstarter, it's just the project. And then how many do you offer for the initial project? And then how many?
But see, the thing is that I don't know that it's like you're not creating a sculpture. You're not creating a collectible book.
Yeah,
you're creating
it's
a
not
product
question
that
of
you
how
want
many.
a nascent composer to use to get better learning their craft. So is it really so important, that you have a special?
Yeah, it's not how many, it's how many pledge and buy it. So
Right.
there's this, okay, so there's this basic level where they get the book, okay?
Right.
And you've got to remember, each level you got to have a profit margin on. But then maybe there's this end level where they get 2 different versions of the book with alternative covers and a coin and a composition uh, written by Bridget Brenmark and blah blah blah. Just the entire works. So it's not a question of how many; it's just a question of how many buy it, because that's what they're doing when they pledge. They're buying it.
Right.
And of course, I think it goes without saying, but it has to be said because so many Kickstarters have funded and then failed at the next step, which irritates everybody, especially Matt Carpenter, no end, which is they fail to send the product out in a timely manner. If it's going to take 6 months, that's fair, as long as people know.
Right.
And I can't say it enough in marketing is that you underpromise and you overdeliver. If you think it's going to take 3 months, tell everybody it's going to take 6 months. Because when they get it at 3 months, you're a hero. But if it's going to take 3 months and you tell them 2 months, they get it at 3 months, you were late and there's a bitter taste in their mouth. So.
Right. Yeah, and I know that a lot of folks have kind of run into that lately too with COVID, of just that
Sure.
everybody's expectations of when they're getting things has been pushed back. But then especially more with Kickstarters, it's like you don't even have an idea of when when you'll get something.
But if something does unexpected happen like COVID, the thing is, people are understanding if you communicate with them, and you can communicate with everyone who pledges to your Kickstarter. You can send an email blast out to all of them and say, because of blah blah blah, we'll be a month late on this. And you know what? 95% of people will go, oh, understandable, thanks for telling me. But when they hear nothing, they're fucking pissed off, and they have a right to be.
Yeah, I had ordered something a couple years ago, and the publisher announced, hey, we're going to get these in this week from, the ships coming in. We're going to get them. And then that week they sent out an email, said, yeah, we got our packages. This printing was unacceptable. Jesus. So we're going to destroy it all and we're going to reprint it. Sorry, it's going to be another 2 months. Fine. Thanks for letting me know.
Yeah. Well, communication and the way you communicate too. And I can't say enough how important reputation is, and just treating people right. I'm talking to the audience. You don't have that issue, obviously, Bridget. But if people are aware of you and they know, look, this is a nice person, and if something comes up, it honestly must have come up, and they're not just making excuses. So all of that said, this sounds so cool, Bridget. Really, really cool. And I know all the rest of us would be happy to help and promote and do anything we can to help you.
It sounds very practical, like useful.
Yes.
So I think especially if there's some way it can be advertised on a page or something for music educators, that probably would be your key demographic.
Well, not only that, but
as a piano teacher, I do know, since I was a piano teacher for years, I do know a lot of those kind of.
But I think she has 2 demographics, Matt, because I think there'd be a lot of people with the illustrations and everything. I think there'd be a lot of people who have no interest in composition or playing the piano or whatnot, or creating creepy music, that would just look at it and go, this is beautiful, I want a copy. because I'm interested in horror. Here's some horror illustrations. Here's some horror compositions. Maybe the upper level, I get to have some horror compositions composed by Bridget. You know, there. I think she has two main markets here.
See, if we were in COVID right now,
yes,
what I would tell Bridget to do is to approach every convention that she can get to with a panel on music in horror film and the importance of music in gaming. Because I know that there are DMs out there who build playlists for their games.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would do a lecture on your experiences and how that relates to film music and horror music and all this stuff. And I would build yourself a reputation as an expert in the field.
Pete, the audience feels that you look very comfortable right now.
Yes.
I was saying looking very natural.
We're all not phased at all.
Because
all right, I'm now getting we're going to have a seizure.
Anyway, that's what I would do. And
actually, we could probably call Gwen Callahan tomorrow with the idea for the next HPL Film Festival, and she'd be all for it. You could approach Neil Hobbs at Necronomicon.
Yeah, Gwen and Brian are such nice people, and not only that, every time they ask me to promote something for them, I do, and every time I ask them to promote something for me, they do, and you may not know them personally, but we do, and there's another end for you. I think you'll be very successful. With
you guys are awesome. And I know for a lot of folks out there too, just thinking about that stuff like Pete was talking about of, okay, how can I get into the scene of where people are going to be interested in this? And that's really good advice.
Yeah. Well,
if you fake it until you make it, and literally,
yeah, like Pete pretends to be an expert on Lovecraftian horror, and now everyone thinks he's an expert on Lovecraftian horror. Actually, he is.
Yeah, he's such an expert on name selection and stuff.
Yes, exactly. You made a point before we depart here. You did make a point a minute ago that I hadn't thought of, Pete, and Logan mentioned it to me the other day about music in games and playlists.
My son is thinking about learning to play piano or synthesizer because he's a video game creator, my youngest son.
Yeah.
And he loves talking about the music for video games. And
awesome.
No, I played here's how impactful that can be. It was just the other day. I was thinking about, as I often do, text adventure games that I played as a kid. Now, Infocom, it was all text adventure. There were never any pictures and things like that. But there's a company called Telarium. This is 40 years ago, okay? These were video games when I was a kid, text adventure. But like there was this game called Dragonheart that I've never gotten the music out of my head. And it was just this MIDI simple music, from way back then. MIDI, I think it is. I forget. But I looked it up on YouTube and I was like, oh, yes, that's the tune. It's so video game music. You're right, Pete. It's pretty powerful too.
Yeah.
So
well, and I can remember in the 90s, there were hardcover first edition books. There were some that would come out with CDs.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And you would play the music while you were reading the book.
That's cool.
And now I know that there are some authors that put together playlists for the book.
Caitlin Kiernan will always list the music she listened to when she was writing a song.
She and Joe
always writing a story. I mean,
and Joe Pulver always mentioned you read a Joe Pulver story and you get to the end and you'll see the music that he was listening to when he wrote that story.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say, you could put like a QR code in there to a SoundCloud or something like that. But I mean, are people really using QR codes as much as they were a few years ago?
QR codes. I use so many QR codes. It's like QR code this, QR code that. I get up in the morning, I have QR codes for breakfast. What the hell's a QR code?
right.
Don't listen. Please, no one in the audience listen to Matt. He's got an AOL.com email address still.
So Bridget,
It works.
I'm right there. I was right there with Matt for a long time.
I don't know if it works. You don't return my emails.
I'm telling you, it works. It's got auto delete.
So anyway, what I found out in the last couple months, so last month I had to travel all over the state of Florida. Every place I went to get food, QR code for the menu. So
Yeah,
you didn't have to
they're
touch it.
everywhere.
They're
It's everywhere.
So
It's everywhere.
instead,
It's
you would
everywhere.
walk in, and instead of handing you a menu, you would just put your hand up with your phone, and your camera would automatically link to a QR code.
That's true. That's super common now.
So they're
Right.
becoming easier and more endemic.
Thanks to all of you for watching and listening. Bridget, Pete, Matt, thanks. Yeah,
You
we'll
can
get to the
just send
prize
that
in
to
one
me.
second. I want to mention our guest next week is, I'm probably saying her name wrong and she'll kill me, Salen
Deservedly so.
Baxter, who was the medium in Host, the movie Host. She was the medium who departed early in the film. And she was the lady that found the Timeless Child. If you watch Doctor Who, it was a non-speaking role, but she's the one who originally found Doctor Who as a child. So they've sort of gone back and added to the legend of Doctor Who that he/she/it is far older than even he knows, or she knows, as the case may be. But yeah, she was in Doctor Who, and she was in Host, and she likes my hair, unlike you, Matt. She mentioned that she likes my hair a lot. So I was like, yeah, you can be on the podcast. You like my hair?
That's the password.
Your hair would be great, Mike, if it were cut off and it was on the floor.
Yeah, I get that a lot. What's the prize?
Okay, remember
Hey,
it
Locks
is
for Love is gonna love that someday.
What?
Locks of Love is gonna love that someday.
I was talking to Linda Addison the other day. She's like, I love how white your hair is. I was like, oh God.
Okay, it's called Mask of Silver. It's an Arkham horror novel. If you want to be the winner, send an email to ezineprizes@gmail.com and put silver in the subject heading, like the color of Mike's hair, except it's shiny and pretty.
What's the shameless plug? Because I want to say it too.
Oh, the shameless plug is that follow Haunting Melody Workbook on Instagram. That's my IG for my project.
Okay. Haunting Melody Workbook, all lowercase, all together.
We wish you all the best, really.
Yeah, we're here for you.
At least from 5 to 7 on Sundays, we are here.
Office hours are every other Tuesday from 3 to 3:15.
Sometimes Thursdays for the Patreon.
I'm like Indiana Jones, when all the students want to talk to him, so he goes out the window and goes home. Anyway, everybody, thanks for watching and listening. Thanks, guys, for being here. Matt, thanks for doing the Saturday night.
We saw The Bay last night. It was really good.
Was it? I
enjoyed the heck out of it.
Yeah.
And Pete's right. It reminded me of Phil Fricassi's Saculina quite a bit.
If make me a moderator on that, and I can help you approve people faster. But if you're interested in movie night, it's you can convert it. It's 9:30 Eastern time every Saturday night, and Matt uses Cast, works real well. Just go to, if you're watching this or you're listening to this, I have a link that says all Lovecraft eZine links here. It's a Linktree link, and if you scroll down at the bottom of those links, one of them will say Saturday Night Movie Night, and click on it, and it'll take you exactly where you need to go and ask to become a member. And give it a day or two. Don't do it 5 minutes before showtime, but and watch movies. So thanks for doing that, Matt. Thanks for the prizes. Thanks for being here, guys. Thanks to all my patrons for letting me do this instead of working at a, I with someone with my qualifications would do very well in the housekeeping or food service industries. So, to quote Ghostbusters. So anyway, thanks to all the patrons who keep me out of those places. And
Larry King Live is looking for a new host.
What?
Larry King Live is looking for a new host.
Oh, too soon?
Too soon? Oh, sorry.
I love that guy. That guy's great.
He was.
Somebody, and I tweeted the other day, somebody said that we forget that he pioneered this live interview thing where anything can go wrong. And I tweeted that, yeah, I'm a much, much, much smaller scale than that, but it struck a chord with me because that's what we do. This show starts as a live show. I mean, even though many people listen to it or watch it later.
Wait, we're live?
Yeah, we're live. Yeah, put your shirt back on. So, all right. Thanks, everybody, and we will see you next week.